All right, folks, welcome back. Welcome to the countdown to the very end. We are so close to the last class, 2 weeks away, 4 lectures, and a final. So let's get this going. As you know, the paper is due a week from today, so I hope all of you are ready for that. Again, I need both the digital and the hard copy submitted to me, so make sure that you guys do that correctly. I'll email today and just make sure to remind you to put that you guys are in my 308 class. That meets Tuesday and Thursdays because I have another 308 class. So for those of you that want to just slide the paper under my office door anytime before the due date, which is the end of of class next week on Tuesday, you're free to do so. And just make sure that you also submit the digital copy to me via the submission option that's available on Moodle for you. And that's it. Are there any questions about the paper? Only if you cite things that are not your textbook and are not the case. If you go outside of that, then yes. If you don't, then no, because that's the assignment to use those resources. So I don't need you to cite them. I don't need it, but if you can just somewhere where you have your name also specify that you are in this particular class, 308, Tuesdays and Thursdays, that would be helpful. Yeah, I don't necessarily need a cover page. Other questions? All right, great. So yeah, so that's the paper. Week away. Make sure that you guys get it done. I'll try to start working on mini paper grading soon. I basically just need to give you guys credit for what you submitted, but I do need to check them. So again, make sure, well, not make sure. I hope that you did write 2 to 3 pages for each mini paper, and if you did and they're in there, then you will get credit for them, and I'll notify you when I get credit for those. Even though I think I might just wait till I have everything done and then I'll submit everything, but maybe not. I don't know. It depends on if I have time to get everything done. My time is limited and these things take time, so I will devote as much as I can to it, and I'll get the information to you guys as soon as possible. All right, so as far as the course goes, we have 2 chapters left. The chapter we're going to start on today and finish on Thursday is chapter 11, Pricing Strategies for Firms with Market Power. So we'll just deal with different issues that sort of branch out from what we've been talking about with respect to like the firm's abilities to, mark up their price over their marginal costs if they have some market power, if they exist in a monopoly or a monopolistically competitive market or an oligopoly. So the first thing we'll consider in this chapter is basic pricing strategies for firms that are not necessarily able to do all the complex analysis that we've been doing because they don't have the information. They don't actually have the resources to calculate the cost functions and everything that you need to be able to be as precise as we've been. So we have a way of sort of estimating how one might go about pricing in a certain competitive context that is directly related to that expression we came up with a while back, relating price to marginal cost, and also the relationship between those and the elasticity. Something that we covered a couple of times already. So I'll just briefly review that again and then kind of show you how that itself, that simple relationship, can be used to basically get a ballpark estimate of like the pricing and some of the information that is necessary to be able to apply some of the methods that we've been covering in more sort of intimate settings where, like, it might be like a small business and they're just like sort of trying to figure out how to best approach without spending thousands of dollars on economic consulting. And then we'll start looking at strategies that yield even greater profits for firms that have market power. So the firms, they want to basically capture as much consumer surplus as possible because that is value that exists in the market. And again, it is excess willingness to pay on behalf of consumers. And so obviously the firms want to figure out ways to kind of capture some of that. So we'll look at a few strategies that allow firms to capture some of that, which actually lead to more efficient outcomes in markets. So efficiency, again, having to do with the amount of consumer and producer surplus that exists in the market, with the perfectly competitive market being the best case of competition, having efficiency at its best, at its most. And as we saw with monopoly, you get the worst outcome where you get deadweight loss, you get mutually beneficial transactions that don't occur, and you get some loss in consumer surplus, which is the deadweight loss. And so the methods that we'll look at kind of help the firms to capture some of that consumer surplus as profit, and so it doesn't get lost as deadweight loss, and therefore it does provide a more efficient outcome to the market. As for consumers, well, they end up losing, of course, but firms end up winning. So in the end, there's a positive gain to society, but obviously, as far as consumers go, that's not a great thing. But everybody has a right to choose what they want as far as like whether they're going to buy things or not. So again, we'll talk about extracting consumer surplus from consumers, and then on the last parts of the chapter, which I don't think we'll get into today, we'll deal with some other sort of interesting circumstances that these firms may face. We won't get into that today. Alrighty. Are there any questions about anything you want me to address before I move forward with the material? All right, so remember, there is just one more chapter to go. I've already opened up all the homeworks, I believe. Yes, I did. Okay. So all the homeworks are open, so you guys are free to just kind of like dive right in and get ahead and start getting ready. Start getting ready for the end, because it is here essentially. The end is here. Like, don't believe otherwise. Like, it's coming. It's here. We are in the end. You should be operating as such. Don't drop the ball. Don't think your free time is yours. It is not yours. It does not belong to you. It belongs to this process that you committed to. So devote everything you have to it. It is going to be worth your time. You should be working now as though you are working a full-time job. That's how you should be approaching this, and just devoting as much time to it, getting all the material you've covered already down in all your classes, so that you can then just kind of brush up your understanding of everything right before the exams, rather than in the last moment try to learn a bunch of stuff, try to just cram information into your head that's not going to make any sense. It's going to overlap. It's going to not be enough to allow you to be successful at what you signed up for here. And you know how critical these last few weeks are, as far as like assignments, grades, midterms, how much of an impact that has on your overall grade. So you have a real chance here to make a very big impact on this whole process and walk away feeling extremely good about it. Don't drop the ball. Don't screw it up. So 3 weeks of hard work, really, really, really hard work. And then it's over, and then you can decompress, you can reboot, you can start over, you can spend the whole summer at the pool, whatever. Like, you can do anything you want, but obviously some of you have to work and whatnot. But I mean, you'll have more free time. Like, life will be back to what you want it to be in a few weeks. But this is not that time. So you have to be in this. You have to have that mentality, and you have to be committed every single day to getting this done in the best way possible. And if you do that, you're going to get a good result, and everything's going to work out fine. But I know I'm not talking to the majority of you that are sitting here, because I know that you are already committed, and you have been committed the entire semester, and you're going to get what you put in. And my hat is off to all of you, of course, for being so committed that you actually choose to come to class on a regular basis, which is important. And I've said it from the beginning. But again, I don't make people do anything. You have to choose to do the things that are going to be beneficial to you at this stage in your lives. And if you don't, then you need to understand that there are consequences to that, and just deal with it. I know that a lot of people that aren't sitting here right now listening to me, if they even are listening to me, which they likely aren't, a chunk of them, none of this matters. So in the end, like, as long as all of you continue doing what you're doing, the people that are committed, the people that are showing up, but also, some of you that are at home that aren't coming to class regularly, I understand you can get this done in an optimal way without ever coming to class. It's been demonstrated several times by people, but there are people that do need that extra sort of sort of direct exposure to the material with me, and there's nothing wrong with that. I used to do the same thing. However you choose to go about it, as long as you're actually committed to it, it works out. Those of you that are coming on a regular basis, you've shown that you're committed, to the extent that at least you're willing to wake up early and drive to school and be here, and that reflects well on your character, reflects well on your drive and your commitment, and that is going to take you far, very, very far. Just don't lose that and keep it up. And again, it's been my pleasure to have you in the class. All right, so yeah, 2-3 weeks, it's over. Suffer now, smile later. Yes.
For the, just to make it clear, for the class participation, it's like it says
There is no participation.
the
The communication.
yeah, the communication.
Okay.
If it's if we haven't really posted anything on Piazza right now, it says like 10% or it's gonna stay like that.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. No, I've been very transparent about it. It's just like, that's your score. But if you break my communication policy, your score goes down. Yeah. And it's meant for people that just do not care ever about like anyone else but themselves. And they're like, I need to all my questions answered when I want it. It's like, no, like you come to class, read my emails. If something's unclear, then we deal with it in the right way. But if you're just like doing whatever you want and it's all about like when it's convenient to you, then that's going to hurt you, because that's not the right approach, and that isn't a bad approach in any professional setting, and this is one. Anyway, I know you don't need this whole answer because I know you understand, but there's people that don't, and anyway. The system is set up that way. It works really well, and yeah, I'm not tricky. Like I'm not gonna like just change things last minute. Like it is what it is. If you've got a 10, that's your score. Just just don't do anything. Don't do anything weird till the end. Yeah, exactly. I had a student email me like a week and a half ago in this other class, and they claim that I lost their exam. Like they said, "Oh, I placed my exam on your table, and now I didn't get a score." And this was like 2 weeks after these scores had been sent out. And then I checked his record, and like he failed the first exam, and he didn't turn in any assignments, any other homework assignments. And like, so I basically called him out on it. I was like, "You are lying. You did not come to class. You're claiming you took an exam you did not take." I haven't heard back from him. Anyway, but that's just an extreme case of like the sort of things that we have to deal with. So like we have to set up certain systems, certain fail safes to make sure that that we can make this manageable for ourselves, and we're dealing with like hundreds of people, or else then it just becomes a disaster. Given that there's a potential for that, I've had a lot of really weird cases like that. Never as extreme, but definitely there's like weirdness that you will all become familiar with if you ever become if you're ever in a position where you're dealing with a lot of people. If you're ultimately all of this leads to you managing a lot of people, then just be prepared for anything. And but it's important that you have your systems in place to be able to make sure that everything gets worked out properly, and ultimately treat people with respect, but be very direct with them about like how things need to go, or else it all falls apart. Anyway, that's my little extra bit of advice to you. All right, I'm going to move forward the material now. So again, we're talking about strategies that firms can use that don't necessarily have the resources that you would need to have, everything available to you to be able to do the analysis we've been talking about. So the most basic pricing strategy used by firms, as we know, with market power, is to just charge a single price to all the consumers. And to do that, they set marginal revenue equal to marginal cost. So just a quick review of that. Suppose the inverse demand for a firm's product is given by that inverse demand function, and the cost function is given by this cost function. Again, fixed cost, variable cost. What is the profit maximizing level of output and price for this firm? So again, this firm is in an industry where there's market power. So again, they're going to set marginal revenue equal to marginal cost. What is the marginal revenue? 10 minus 4Q is correct. Good job, folks. And what is the marginal cost? 2 is the marginal cost. Great, folks. Good job. All right, so for the inverse demand function, again, that's the marginal revenue. We just double the slope in absolute value. Marginal cost is equal to 2. Set those equal to each other, do a little bit of algebra, and then we solve for our optimal output, which is equal to 2 units. And then to get the price, again, you plug it into your inverse demand function, and you get the price. So that's the basic stuff that we've been doing. This is something that needs to be gotten from a market, right? So like we talked about in chapter 3, how one could do some statistical analysis via some regression program, like Excel provides a regression function, as we mentioned. Collecting, if you have some data on the market with prices and quantities at in different locations, maybe, then you can just put them into your Excel sheet, run a regression, and then you can estimate your demand function. And the cost function, you can do a similar sort of thing. It will depend on sort of your ability to have like varying data on like different quantities and output, or a relationship between different amounts of labor and output, and how that depends on the amount of capital you might have. So so it can get a little bit complicated as far as being able to actually come up with this equation, and it's not impossible, and you may end up working at a firm that has its own department that deals with that. Or you can, again, hire economic consultants to get that information, but sometimes that is not accessible. All right, so let's look at then a simple pricing rule for monopoly and monopolistic competition when the firm does not have that kind of information or resources. So in instances where a manager has estimates of the demand and cost functions for the firm's product, calculation for the profit maximizing price is straightforward. In some cases, a manager lacks access to these estimates. Given minimal information about demand and cost, a manager can do a reasonably good job of determining what price to charge for a product without demand and cost functions. So most retailers have a rough estimate of marginal cost of each item sold. So the marginal cost part, you can sort of just kind of ballpark. The manager of a clothing store knows how much the store pays the supplier for each pair of jeans and has crude information about the marginal cost of selling jeans. It's crude because it doesn't include like marginal labor costs. So it's basically just like the extra cost of maybe purchasing an additional pair of jeans. But it's a ballpark sort of marginal cost. The clothing store manager also has some crude information about the elasticity of demand for jeans at its store. So small firms can obtain some information about demand and cost from publicly available information. So this is a table we looked at a few chapters back in chapter 6. I think it was chapter 7 actually. We were looking at different measures that help us to look at structure and conduct of the industry, and so this is information on the own price elasticity of market demand versus the own price elasticity of demand for the individual firm, and this is something that was generated by the National Bureau of Economic Research, which again is a public entity. They have a website. They have all sorts of data on there. You can always do searches and find all sorts of really valuable information there that again is provided for free. So you can get estimates of elasticities of the kind of market environment that you might be working in. So in the absence of better information, the manager of a clothing store can use this to estimate approximate the elasticity of demand for jeans sold at his or her store. The key is to recall the relationship between the elasticity of demand for a firm's product and marginal revenue, which we derived in chapter 8. So here again is the formula: marginal revenue for a firm with market power. The marginal revenue for a firm with market power is given by this relationship here, where again marginal revenue is equal to price times 1 plus the elasticity of the firm over the elasticity of the firm, where again elasticity of the firm is EF is the own price elasticity of demand for the firm's product, and P is the price charged. Since the profit maximizing level of output is where marginal revenue equals marginal cost, and this formula implies that this term also equals marginal cost, at the profit maximizing level of output. So if we solve the equation for price, then we obtain the profit maximizing price for a firm with market power. So just doing a little bit of algebra there, getting this term on the right-hand side by multiplying both sides by the reciprocal, we get this expression here. So this expression can be used by a firm to figure out how much they should charge given the amount of elasticity that they face in their firm, in like a representative firm in the market that they are operating in. So again, this tells us the price that maximizes profits is some number K times marginal cost, where K is equal to this ratio of the elasticity of the firm over 1 plus the elasticity of the firm. So again, price equals marginal cost in a perfectly competitive industry. So K will reflect the degree of market power the firm has given the nature of the industry they operate in. So for the case of the clothing store, the manager's best estimate of the elasticity of demand is negative 4.1. So plugging that into this formula here, then when you wind up with 1.32. So in this market that this store operates in, the clothing market, then there is some market power, and they're able to price a third above their marginal cost, essentially. So again, it's a ballpark estimate. It's not as precise as the information that we've been using, but it's definitely better than just kind of like throwing a number out there and seeing if it sticks. Like, again, it does reflect like willingness to pay of people, given the current economic conditions. That data is generated on a regular basis, and it will reflect current economic conditions. Generally, you'll get either exact data from stores that maybe provide that to the government, or they'll do like surveys of people and basically just ask them questions about what they're willing to pay and what they're willing to buy, that kind of thing. So you'll get some good information, and therefore this will wind up being decent. Again, the marginal cost is a ballpark, and so is the markup, and so it's not going to be precise, but it's going to be close, and it's going to do what you need it to do, which is sort of help you to optimize your profits, given the fact that you are not able to hire an economic consultant to do everything we've been doing in the class. So a manager should know two important things about the pricing rule. The first is that the more elastic the demand for the firm's product, the lower the profit maximizing market will be. So again, that just reflects the fact that generally with market power, there's going to be less close substitutes to the goods. And so therefore demand will be more inelastic in those situations because people will be less responsive to price changes because they'll have less goods to substitute to if the price of the good they buy changes. But then the opposite is the case, of course. The more substitutes exist, the more elastic demand gets, the less the markup will be. So again, higher elasticity implies many available substitutes for a product. In the extreme case, where the elasticity of demand is perfectly elastic, as we assumed in the perfect competition case, where you had that horizontal demand curve at the equilibrium price in the market, where again that demonstrated that the elasticity of demand was infinite, which meant that people were as responsive as possible to a price change, because in perfect competition there's an unlimited amount of substitutes available to consumers, and therefore they can find anyone else that's going to charge them a lower price if somebody tries to charge a higher price, which means that quantity demanded goes down to zero as soon as somebody tries to raise the price even by a penny. The second thing to notice is that the higher the marginal cost, the higher the profit maximizing price. So that's a pretty simple thing to sort of identify. Other things being the same, firms with higher marginal costs will charge higher prices than firms with lower marginal costs. So again, what's important there is to understand that, like, depending on the situation you're in, you may be in a different competitive place in relation to your competitors that may have lower or higher costs, and so they will wind up charging different prices if they follow a similar rule. So it's just something to keep keep sort of track of. If your prices are coming out too high relative to your competitors, then your marginal cost is definitely the place where you can do something about that and sort of try to lower that in some way. So one caveat to keep in mind is that the elasticity of demand may change when you alter the price of a good or service. Another thing to keep in mind is, again, the relationship between different prices and the elasticity is the fact that elasticity changes along the demand curve. So in chapter 3, we learned that when the demand function is linear, demand is more elastic at high prices than at low prices. A slight increase in price will lead to a slight increase in the elasticity of demand, which in turn makes the optimal markup slightly lower than that calculated based on the original estimate of the elasticity of demand. So that's something else to keep in mind. For this reason, if you have an estimate of the demand function, if you're able to at least get that, then you may more accurately determine the profit maximizing price by just using the simple rule of setting marginal revenue equal to marginal cost. Again, if you can estimate the demand function, you know how to get the marginal revenue, and so if you have the ballpark marginal cost that you kind of just assume based on your own costs, then you can get a decent estimate without encountering this sort of complication from the fact that, again, elasticity changes along the demand curve if the demand is linear. If the only information available is a numerical estimate of the elasticity of demand, the profit maximizing markup formula may be used to approximate the optimal markup in price, though. Under certain conditions, this approach exactly yields the optimal markup. We learned in chapter 3 that the elasticity of demand is constant for a log linear demand function. So if demand is not linear, but it's log linear, which is what we looked at in chapter 3 when we were doing some elasticity estimates, then that means that the elasticity of demand is constant along the demand curve, and therefore that will not be a complication. All right, quick demonstration problem. The manager of a convenience store competes in a monopolistically competitive market and buys cola from a supplier at a price of $1.25 per liter. So that's essentially their marginal cost. The manager thinks that because there are several supermarkets nearby, the demand for cola sold at her store is slightly more elastic than the elasticity for the representative food store reported in chapter 7, which is negative 3.8. So based on the information, she perceives that the elasticity of demand for cola sold by her store is negative 4. She just ballparks it, adds in that extra elasticity because she understands the competitive conditions that she exists in her particular area. What price should the manager charge for a liter of cola to maximize profits? All right, so again, we're going to use this formula. Using the pricing rule for a monopolistically competitive firm. So the pricing rule, again, applies to both monopolies and monopolistically competitive firms. The profit maximizing price is going to equal P equals marginal cost times, again, the markup factor, which is equal to the elasticity of the firm over 1 plus the elasticity of the firm. So we have marginal cost equals 125, and the elasticity that she ballparked is negative 4, and then you plug that in, and you wind up with 1.25 times 1.33, which equals 1.67. So $1.67 is the optimal price that she should charge, again, based on using this approach, which not perfect, but again, is a more accessible version of some of the stuff we've been doing on a smaller scale for more intimate settings. All right, so the rule changes slightly. We're talking about oligopoly, but it doesn't necessarily change it completely. We just need to add that extra dimension of the fact that you know that there is a finite number of firms competing in these markets, and there is interdependence in that competition. So recall that in a Cournot oligopoly, one of the oligopoly models that we looked at in chapter 9, there are a few firms in the market servicing many consumers. The firms either produce differentiated or homogeneous products, slightly different versions of the products being sold or exactly the same version of the product being sold. And each firm believes that rivals will hold their output constant if it changes its own output. So that's the main assumption that sort of leads to the whole Cournot outcome, which is that all the firms are choosing their quantities at the same time. They're competing on quantities, and they are Again, sort of assuming that their rival's output is constant because they need to basically have a perspective on the market that kind of just leaves for them that piece of the market that they can work with. So the rest of it is assumed to be constant. And then again, using that information, we developed the residual demand, which then got us to the marginal revenue, which then setting it equal to marginal cost, got us to the Cournot reaction function, which tells us how a firm should optimally set their output in relation to their opponents. We looked at the duopoly case with only two firms, so that was just the quantity of output of the one firm we were looking at, their output as a function of their rival's output. That was the reaction function. The two reaction functions interacted and got us to a Nash equilibrium, an equilibrium for that market in which neither firm had an incentive to deviate from the quantities that they chose. Now, again, to do all that, you need a lot of information. You need a lot of information about everybody else's sort of costs, and which you can, again, estimate based on what you know about the market. But it's like, obviously, the world is not as transparent as we assumed it to be in those problems. So, again, the stuff that we learn here is just benchmark stuff. It's just kind of like the most controlled, basic situation that you can encounter. And then life is obviously different than that. But then you have this as a basis to like start from. Like, this is how it should work. In reality, these are the circumstances that are different than what we assumed in the problems. So let's adjust what we've done and just try to get to a more realistic outcome, with the interaction of both your creativity, your innovation, and your basic intuition based on what you learned here. All right, so again, if you don't have that information, we can maybe figure out a way to kind of ballpark how to choose outputs in that kind of setting. So in that setting, again, we saw how to calculate the profit maximizing price and quantity, given information about demand and cost curves. Recall that the procedure required full information about the demand and cost of all firms in the industry. The simple pricing rule can be altered for managers working in a Cournot oligopoly. Suppose that an industry consists of n Cournot oligopolists, so some number n. Again, oligopoly generally will have like 2 to 8 roughly firms. Each of the firms having identical cost structure, so that's generally going to be the case. Like, you're not going to get a lot of firms with cost advantages, because generally what will be keeping most firms out is increasing returns to scale, meaning decreasing average total cost. So the firms have to be a certain size to be able to compete in those markets. And so that's the only way they'll be able to exist in those markets. And therefore, most will wind up having similar cost structures. And let's say we're also assuming that they sell similar products. All right, so this is the profit maximizing markup for Cournot oligopoly. If there are n identical firms in the Cournot oligopoly, the profit maximizing price for a firm in this market is going to be figured out by using this expression here, which is essentially the expression that we looked at for monopoly and monopolistically competitive firms, with one slight difference. So here there are n number of firms in the industry, and EM is the market elasticity of demand, and MC is the marginal cost. So the pricing rule given has a simple justification. When firms in a Cournot oligopoly sell identical products, the elasticity of demand for an individual firm's product is going to be n times the market elasticity of demand. So as more firms get into the market, the firm becomes more competitive, and you can ballpark the elasticity by, again, multiplying the number of firms times the market elasticity of demand. If n equals 1, then we have a monopoly, and the elasticity of demand for that firm's product is the same as the market elasticity of demand. When n equals 2, you've got a Cournot duopoly. There's 2 firms in the market, and each firm's elasticity of demand is twice as elastic as that for the market. The markup formula is thus identical to that presented in the previous section, again, with just the slight difference of, instead of just using the individual firms' elasticity of demand, multiplying the market demand by the number of firms. So these aspects of this pricing rule for Cournot oligopoly are, of course, 3 aspects are worth noting. One, again, is that the more elastic the market demand, the closer the profit maximizing price is to marginal cost. So just like any market, in an oligopoly, as more firms exist in the market, then you approach perfect competition. It's always kind of leading to perfect competition because perfect competition is the best outcome for the market. And so as more and more firms exist in markets, demand becomes more elastic, with the limiting case being the perfectly elastic demand that you see in a perfectly competitive market. As the number of firms increases, the profit maximizing price gets closer to marginal cost. So as we increase the number of firms, then this number will approach 1, and therefore price will approach marginal cost. So again, in the limiting case where there are infinitely many firms and n equals infinity, the profit maximizing price is equal to marginal cost. And finally, the higher the marginal cost, the higher the profit maximizing price, as is the case in the first section we looked at. Quick demonstration problem. Suppose 3 firms compete in a homogeneous product, Kuno industry. The market elasticity of demand for the product is -2, and each firm's marginal cost of production is equal to 50. What is the market? What is the profit maximizing price? Is what we're going to look at here. So again, we're going to use that formula we just looked at. We've got 3 firms, so n equals 3. We've got the market elasticity to equal -2, and we've got marginal cost to equal 50. So plugging that information into our formula here, we can figure out that the profit maximizing price is going to be equal to, in this case, $60. So again, not a result of all the sort of mathematical hijinks that we engaged in chapter 9, but gets us to a ballpark of what will result in this Kuno oligopoly as far as the pricing goes, given, again, the basic information that you can get from different sources that are accessible to most firms. Are there any questions about that stuff? All right, so it's not all theoretical abstract. There is some practical use to all the information that we've covered in this class. But again, you're not going to understand this unless we talked about everything we talked about up until this point. So, but in the end, like you will get some important information from this course if you are paying attention and you are really seeing it for what it's worth, which is, again, very practical ultimately. So you should never run away from courses, even if you're taking a course and you feel like it's not ultimately what you're going to be doing. Like, it is always worth your time to pay attention to the stuff that you're learning in courses. Always. There's all sorts of information I have in my head from all the classes that I was forced to take in undergrad, GE, and all that stuff. That has really helped me throughout life in various circumstances. You know, things pop up in my head. Oh, I learned this here. I learned this here. I learned this here, and it's helped me, and it will help you as well. And so don't ever write off anything you learn in any of these classes, regardless of what you might think of the class. All right, let's move on now to strategies that yield even greater profits. So in some markets, managers can enhance profits above those that they would earn by simply charging a single per unit price to all consumers. So let's talk about how they could do that via extracting consumer surplus from consumers. So the first 4 strategies are strategies appropriate for firms with various cost structures and degrees of market interdependence. So again, they can be very interdependent, like in an oligopoly, or maybe not, but still have market power, like in monopolistically competitive firms and in monopolies. So these strategies can enhance profits for firms in any of those 3 industries. All right, so the first approach is called price discrimination, which essentially means charging different prices to different consumers. So charging different prices for the same product or service. There are 3 basic types of price discrimination. The first type is called first degree price discrimination, also known as perfect price discrimination. So ideally, a firm would like to engage in what's called first degree price discrimination, charge each consumer the maximum price that he or she would be willing to pay for each unit of the good purchase. This allows a firm to extract all the consumer surplus from consumers and earn the highest possible profits. Of course, it's difficult for a firm to implement this strategy. It's difficult for any firm to know exactly how much every person is willing to pay in general, but then to actually get them to pay that is another hurdle. So two big hurdles to achieve perfect price discrimination, which is why in practice you won't see it that often. Some service-related businesses, including car dealers, mechanics, doctors, lawyers, successfully do practice a form of first-degree price discrimination. So most car dealers will post a sticker price on cars that's well above the dealer's actual marginal cost, and then offer discounts, right, to different customers on a case-by-case basis. Have a discussion with them, let them talk the manager down to the price that they're willing to pay, thereby revealing their willingness to pay, thereby paying what they are willing to pay. Consumer surplus is extracted. Yes.
So I was reading this article about how like MGM hotels in Vegas would like charge their inventory based on like the vacancy of the hotel. So like would that be a form of price discrimination? Like for example, that when the hotel's full in like the summer, like they'll charge water bottles for I don't know $3 or $4, but when it's like empty, sometimes during non-peak points they'll charge like a lower price for it. So would that be an example?
Yeah, that would be an example. It's not perfect price discrimination. That would be charging different prices to different consumers at different times. That would likely be a form of what's called third-degree price discrimination. We'll look at it in a second. But yeah, that is definitely a form of it. Yeah. So again, this type of approach works in particular settings, right? Mechanics, doctors, lawyers, they can all kind of do that because they don't like post up their prices on a menu, right? But we also kind of see it, we can also maybe see it online, like on some of these digital sellers, that they can sort of kind of gauge, I think, they have certain algorithms, I think, that just kind of figure out like how much you are willing to pay for things based on how much you buy and the type of things you buy. And I think prices then do adjust to those conditions. Like I've kind of noticed that. I've noticed my prices being kind of in flux when buying from Amazon. Like one week it'll be one price, then it'll be something else. So I think given the fact that we've all kind of turned to like the digital space to buy a lot of what we buy, that's given the firms opportunities to exploit price discrimination schemes via their algorithms, which I'm sure is a really interesting area right now for these firms. Like if any of you were to go into like computer programming and ultimately working on these algorithms, I'm sure figuring these types of algorithms out that could extract surpluses that have not been figured out yet can be very lucrative. Anyway, let's look at how first-degree price discrimination works graphically. So here we've got demand, and here we've got the marginal cost above the minimum of the average variable cost of some firm, how much they're willing to supply, essentially. Each point on the market demand curve reflects the maximum price consumers will be willing to pay for each incremental unit of output. So that's what demand represents, again, like the willingness to pay of various consumers. Consumers start out with 0 units of the good, and the firm can sell the first incremental unit for slightly less than $10. $10 being the choke price, the price at which quantity demanded is equal to 0. Since the demand curve slopes downward, the maximum price a firm can charge for each additional unit declines, ultimately to $4 at an output of 5 units, which is the last unit, the amount that they can sell above their marginal cost. Beyond that, obviously, prices would be below their marginal cost. So the shaded area between the demand curve and the firm's marginal cost curve reflects the total contribution to the firm's profit when it charges each consumer the maximum price she or he would be willing to pay for small increments of output between 0 and 5 units. So again, all these people here have an excess willingness to pay. If this was a perfectly competitive market and the equilibrium price was $4, then all of these folks would benefit by not having to pay what they're willing to pay. And the firm would, of course, make this in producer surplus, which essentially represents their profits. and this would be just saved by consumers. But if, again, the firms are able to sell each consumer what they're willing to, the good at the price that they're willing to pay for it, then all that consumer surplus is taken as profit. So all consumer surplus in this case is extracted in the case of perfect price discrimination. All right, let's look at second degree price discrimination. Is the practice of posting a discrete schedule of declining prices for different ranges of quantities, essentially setting up a menu of prices. If you buy 2 units, you'll get it for $8 a unit. If you buy 5 units, we'll give it to you for $6 a unit. So given a posted schedule of prices, consumers sort themselves by choosing the price quantity combinations they're willing to pay for, according to their willingness to pay for alternative quantities of the good. Suppose the Acme Beverage Company charges consumers $7.60 per case for the first 2 cases, and $5.20 for each additional case. So in that case, folks can buy 2 units at $7.60, and those people will wind up with some consumer surplus, which again is represented by this triangle here, and then the amount of consumer surplus that they had is taken by the firm as profit. And then folks that want to buy additional units pay $5.20 for them. And again, those people wind up with some consumer surplus as well, which is here. And then some of their consumer surplus is taken as profit as well. So these are the contributions to profits under second degree price discrimination. You wind up with, again, more profits from the firms, less consumer surplus, but obviously good for the bottom line for firms. Consumers purchasing small quantities, or alternatively, those having higher marginal valuations, pay higher prices than those who will purchase in bulk. And of course, finally, there's third degree price discrimination. The final type of price discrimination is commonly practiced by firms that recognize that the demand for their product differs systematically across consumers in different demographic groups. So third degree price discrimination involves firms can profit by charging different groups of consumers different prices for the same product. It's common for stores to offer student discounts and for hotels and restaurants to offer senior citizen discounts. So that's one form of third degree price discrimination. Again, you have different demographic groups being charged different prices, but definitely temporal price discrimination can occur in the way that was mentioned by your colleague here. So suppose a firm with market power can charge 2 different prices to 2 groups of consumers, and the marginal revenues of selling to one group, to group 1 and group 2, are MR1 and MR2 respectively. The basic profit maximizing rule to produce output such that marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost is still valid, but with one small difference here. To maximize profits, the firm should equate the marginal revenue from selling output to each group to marginal cost. So there's going to be marginal revenue from, let's say, the senior citizen group. That's going to be different from the marginal revenue from the student group. And so, again, they want to sell enough to the point where at least the marginal revenue exceeds marginal cost, up to the point where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. This implies that they want to sell at the point where the marginal revenues are equivalent. So to see why, suppose the marginal revenue for group 1 is 10 and the marginal revenue for group 2 is 5. So if one less unit were sold to group 2, then revenue from that group would fall by 5 units. If the extra unit of output were sold to group 1, then revenue would increase by 10 units. So that allocation would continue until the marginal revenues to the 2 groups are exactly equal, because we know the marginal revenue decreases as more units are sold because there is downward sloping demand that these firms face. And so eventually selling to group 1 would decrease marginal revenue to the point where it is equivalent to the marginal revenue in the second group. To understand the basis for third degree price discrimination, suppose 2 groups of consumers have elasticities of demand, E1 and E2, and the firm can charge group 1 a price P1 and group 2 a price P2. Using the formula for marginal revenue of a firm with market power, it follows that the marginal revenue of selling the product to group 1 at a price of P1 is going to be equal to this expression here for a firm that doesn't have all the cost stuff that we talked about and a precise sort of gauge of the demand. So again, we can use that formula that we derived in the last section to sort of figure out how the firm should price discriminate, given that they are, again, facing two different groups with two different price elasticities. So while the marginal revenue of selling to group 2 at a price of P2 is going to equal this, as mentioned, a profit maximizing firm should equate the marginal revenue of each group to marginal cost, which implies that MR1 should be equal to MR2, and therefore these two expressions should be set equal to each other. If E1 equals E2, basically all the customers have the same elasticity, same sensitivity to price changes. The terms in the brackets will be equal, and thus the prices will be equal across the groups. In order for third-degree price discrimination to enhance profits, differences have to exist in the elasticities of demand for the various customers. Senior citizens do tend to have a more elastic demand, right? They're more sensitive to demand for a hotel room or a restaurant than other consumers because they are on fixed incomes, right? So another condition that must exist for third-degree price discrimination to be effective is that the firm must have some means of identifying the elasticity of demand by different groups of consumers. In practice, this is not difficult to do so. Hotels require individuals seeking a senior citizen discount to present evidence of their age, such as driver's license. Also, no type of price discrimination will work if the consumers purchasing at lower prices can then turn around and resell the product to individuals being charged higher prices. So there has to be a way to stop that arbitrage, that buy low, sell high thing that could exist in these contexts. So those consumers charge lower prices can undercut the price the firm is charging the other group, thus reducing the firm's profits. So that's important. That last condition is very important, or else it won't work. All right, let's do a demonstration problem to figure out how this can all be sort of figured out. So you are the manager of a pizzeria that produces at a marginal cost of $6 per pizza. The pizzeria is a local monopoly near campus. There's no other restaurants or food stores within 500 miles. During the day, only students eat at your restaurant. In the evening, while students are studying, faculty members eat there. So if students have an elasticity of demand for pizzas of -4, so definitely very elastic demand. Students, obviously, you guys know your incomes are very fixed as well, and so you're not necessarily willing to pay high prices for things, especially if the prices increase. And the faculty has an elasticity of demand of -2. What should your pricing policy be to maximize profits? All right, so to figure that out, we're assuming the faculty would be unwilling to purchase cold pizza from students, so we're going to assume that the arbitrage situation does not exist, that students cannot buy the pizzas and then sell them to the faculty at a lower price than they would have to pay the faculty. The conditions for the effective price discrimination then do hold. It will be profitable to charge one price, PL, on the lunch menu, effectively the student price, and another price, PD, on the dinner menu, which is the faculty price. The conditions for profit maximization require that the marginal revenue of selling a pizza to each group should equal marginal cost. So using third-degree price discrimination rule, this means that, again, the lunch price, which again is dependent on the elasticity of demand of students, be set equal to marginal cost, and again the dinner price, depending on the elasticity of demand for faculty, be set equal to marginal cost, which means they should be set equal to each other. Plugging in our elasticities of demand for each different group, we get ED, the faculty again is -2, students are 4 more elastic, and our marginal cost is 6. So plugging that information in gets us to, in this case, just figuring this out, gets us to 3/4, which means that the price should be equal to $8 for the lunchtime crowd, and then the dinner price should be equal to, in this case, $12. So again, just using the information that we developed in the first part of the chapter and knowledge about the elasticities of demand of these various groups, you can figure out the optimal pricing scheme to charge these two different groups. And again, it is dependent on them actually having a different willingness to pay, and also the availability of the elasticities. Yeah.
So for firms that they don't necessarily charge for price for demographics, but they charge higher prices where they don't face competition, and lower prices when they do face competition, would that fall under the third degree?
Yeah, because that would only happen like in different geographic areas. Like you would have, an area maybe where like a gas station is the only supplier of gas, and versus like a gas station in a city where they have like all sorts of, but maybe they're owned by the same person. So yeah, like they can charge different prices in different locations. But that's the only way you can have that kind of situation where a firm is competing in two different competitive contexts. Like they would have to be in different geographic areas. But yeah, third degree price discrimination applies to that scenario. Any questions on this? All right, so to maximize profits, you should charge a price for a pizza on the lunch menu of $8 and a price on the dinner menu at $12. Since students have a more elastic demand for pizza than do faculty members, they should be charged a lower price to maximize profits. All right, another sort of strategy that firms use to yield even greater profits, which is dependent on them capturing consumer surplus, is called two-part pricing. So in two-part pricing, a firm charges a fixed fee for the right to purchase the goods, and then a per unit charge for each unit purchased. So golf courses and gyms typically charge a fixed initiation fee, plus charge either a per month or per visit to use their faculties. You can also think of like Netflix. They have a similar situation where they charge you the price just to use their service, and essentially the marginal cost is equal to zero. So they don't charge you an additional per unit charge, but it is sort of the same sort of approach. We'll consider a few other cases in a second. So consider the following firm with market power. Again, this is a downward sloping demand. Here's their marginal revenue. We're assuming marginal cost is constant here, which equals average cost. The inverse demand is P equals 10 minus Q, and the cost function is equal to 2Q. If the firm adopted a pricing strategy of charging a single price to all consumers, the profit maximizing price would be equal to $6. They would set their marginal cost equal to marginal revenue. They'd get that 4-unit optimal output, which means that people are willing to pay $6 for it. All right, so the firm's profits in this case would be given to the difference between the price they charge, their marginal cost, times the price they charge minus the average cost of producing times the amount they're selling. So this rectangle represents their profits. In this case, it would be $16. The consumer surplus is, of course, given by the shaded area, which is equal to $8 in this very specific case. Like first-degree price discrimination, two-part pricing allows a firm to extract all the consumer surplus from consumers. So the demand function here is of a single individual, and the firm uses the following pricing scheme. They charge a fixed fee of $32 that gives the consumer the right to buy the product at a per unit charge of $2. With a per unit charge of $2, the consumer will purchase 8 units and receive a consumer surplus of. So setting the price equal to marginal cost is $2, and then the consumer surplus is, of course, the area under the curve and above that price, so that this whole triangle here. So we've got, again, the height, the width times the height times 1/2. So the height is equal to 10 minus 2, which is 8. The width is equal to 8, and we've got, therefore, 8 times 8 divided by 2, $32. So $32 is the consumer surplus, and therefore that is the fixed fee they should charge in order to allow the consumer to then purchase each additional unit at marginal cost. By charging a fixed fee of $32, the firm extracts all of the consumer surplus. The firm sells each unit at its marginal cost of $2 and thus makes no profit on each unit sold at that price. So they don't make any profit on each unit sold, but of course the consumer surplus is profit. The fixed payment of $32 is pure profit. $32 in profits earned using the two-part pricing scheme is larger than the $16 the firm would have earned by using a simple pricing strategy. And in this case, we get a more efficient market outcome. We have twice as many people being able to buy the good. Yes, the firm does profit more, but so does society by having more people being able to buy the things they want to buy. So two-part pricing. A firm can enhance profits by engaging in two-part pricing. Charge a per unit price that equals marginal cost plus a fixed fee equal to the consumer surplus each consumer receives at that per unit price. Notice that if the marginal cost is low, the optimal per output fee would be low as well. So in the extreme case where marginal cost is equal to zero, a firm's profit maximizing two-part pricing strategy will be to charge $0 for each visit, but a fixed initiation fee equal to a consumer surplus. So again, that is what like Netflix does. Amazon Prime does it as well. Like some of these store like Costco and stores that require like those yearly fees to be able to enter their stores to buy stuff. Like they also have this kind of calculation that they are engaging in order to figure out how much that yearly fee should be based on what consumers are willing to pay. So it's a good strategy for firms, and if consumers are willing to pay, which they are, because again, the demand conditions do reflect willingness to pay, and so it is a very precise sort of approach. With the two-part pricing, all profits are derived from the fixed fee in this case. So setting the per unit fee equal to marginal cost ensures that surplus is as large as possible, thus allowing the largest fixed fee consistent with maximizing profits. Quick demonstration problem. Suppose the total monthly demand for golf services is equal to P equals 20 minus Q. The marginal cost to the firm of each round is equal to $1. If the demand function is based on the individual demand of 10 golfers, so this is the total monthly demand of 10 different golfers, what is the optimal two-part pricing strategy for this golf services firm is what's being asked here. So we also want to figure out how much profit the firm will earn. So the optimal per unit charge is going to be equal to marginal cost based on just how two-part pricing works. So at this price, 20 minus 1, so again, we have a marginal cost of $1. So plugging in that dollar for price and then solving for quantity, we're going to have 19 rounds of golf being played each month. The total consumer surplus received by all 10 golfers at this price is going to then equal, so you have to be able to figure out consumer surplus here. So again, it is the difference between the choke price, the price at which quantity demanded is equal to 0, which is also the y-intercept for the inverse demand function, minus the price being charged, which is in this case $1, marginal cost, times the amount being sold at that price, which is 19. So that's how we figure out the consumer surplus for all 10 golfers. But the firm can't charge all of the golfers $180.50 because they have 10 golfers, so they have to get the average consumer surplus for each one to be able to figure out the per unit fee each one should be charged in order to get the right to golf. So since this is the total consumer surplus enjoyed by all 10 consumers, the optimal fixed fee is the consumer surplus enjoyed by an individual golfer, which is $18.05, $180.50 divided by 10. Thus, the optimal two-part pricing strategy is for the firm to charge a monthly fixed fee of $18.05 and greens fee, meaning, again, each round that they play of golf to cost them $1. The total profits of the firm, in this case, are going to equal $180.50 per month minus the firm's fixed costs. All right, the last one we'll look at today is called block pricing. So if you have purchased toilet paper in packages of 4 rolls or cans of soda in 6 packs, you have had first-hand experience with block pricing. Suppose an individual consumer's inverse demand function is given by P equals 10 minus Q, and the firm's costs are equal to 2Q. If a firm charges a price of $2 per unit, it will sell 8 units to consumers. The consumer receives a surplus of the upper triangle, which is, of course, its consumer surplus. Again, the difference between choke price that they get charged, times the quantity they get sold, times 1/2. The consumer pays, in this case, $16, 2 times 8, to the firm for the 8 units, but receives an additional surplus of $32 in this case. So that's the total value to the consumers. Again, what they actually wind up paying, plus the amount of consumer surplus they have in the market at that price, which is equal to $48, 16 plus 32. So block pricing provides a means by which the firm can get the consumer to pay the full value of the 8 units. Suppose the firm packaged 8 units of its product and charged a single price for the package. In this case, the consumer has to make an all or none decision, buying all 8 units or buying nothing at all. As long as the price of the package of 8 units is not greater than $48, this consumer will find it in her or his best interest to buy the package. So charging the consumer the total amount that they value the good at in that quantity will obviously enhance the firm's profits. In this case, profit with block pricing will be all the consumer surplus. So the profit maximizing price for the firm to charge for the package of 8 units is thus the $48. By charging this price for a package of 8 instead of pricing each unit separately and letting the consumer choose how many units to buy, the firm earns the $32 in profits, the value of the would-be consumer surplus when the price is only $2. Summing up the block pricing principle, by packaging units of a product and selling them as one package, the firm earns more than by posting a simple per unit price. The profit maximizing price on a package is the total value the consumer receives for the package. Block pricing enhances profits by forcing consumers to make all or none decisions to purchase units of the good. All right, quick demonstration problem. Suppose a consumer's inverse demand function for gum produced by a firm with market power is given by P equals 0.2 minus 0.04 Q, and the marginal cost is equal to 0. What price should the firm charge for a package containing 5 pieces of gum? All right, so the answer here. So again, we've got Q equals 5 when P equals 0. Because again, they would set the price equal to marginal cost, which is 0. When Q equals 0, P equals 0.2. That's the choke price. So the total value to the consumer of 5 pieces of gum is equal to, again, the total consumer surplus that we see here, which is the difference between the choke price, 0.2, the price they would charge, which is 0, marginal cost, times the amount they would sell, which is 5, times 1/2. The firm extracts all this surplus by charging a price of, in this case, 50 cents for a package of 5 pieces of gum. Block pricing. All right, let's call it a day there.